The subcommittee will come to order. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to our first hearing in the 115th Congress. We would have had this earlier, but we got snow out here. Today, we will review Coast Guard and maritime transportation programs. As we all know, the United States Coast Guard is a critical component of our nation's defense and homeland security. It is an armed service, and of the 5 armed services, it is unique as the only one with law enforcement abilities. The Coast Guard has moved between different federal departments over its history, with some departments being a better fit than others for the service. I have ongoing concerns with the Coast Guard being within the Department of Homeland Security. On its face, the Coast Guard should fit comfortably within the department due to its role in defense and homeland security. However, when it comes to budgetary support, it appears the department, or more likely it is the Office of Management and Budget, ignores Coast Guard priorities for department or other administration priorities. The Coast Guard's budget has been determined to be non-defense discretionary, placing it in competition against all non-military discretionary spending, despite the Coast Guard being a military service at its core. No other military service has experienced such a disadvantage and been denied budget clarity and foresight like the Coast Guard. This, without question, is a big risk to national security and should compel a more serious budget approach. There are a number of us, including the ranking member and myself, that are members of both this committee and the Armed Services Committee, who understand the requirements of the service. When the service is active in a time of conflict, it works as part of the Navy, but every day its missions are critical to our national defense. I will repeat myself. Every day the Coast Guard's missions are critical to our nation's defense. We are nowhere near close to the budget numbers being final, and I look forward to working with the Coast Guard to provide the service with the funding it needs to do its job. We will also hear from the Federal Maritime Commission, the FMC. The FMC implements the Shipping Act of 1984 and other shipping-related legislation. The FMC administers a limited antitrust exemption for ocean carriers to ensure fair competition among foreign and U.S. shipping interests. The contraction of the ocean carrier industry over the last couple of years has many carriers operating within shipping alliances to reduce operating costs. The FMC oversees agreements that form these alliances to ensure they adhere to the limited antitrust exemption. Recent action by the FMC has U.S. industry concerned that the limited exemption is being misused. The industry was also rocked by the Hanjin bankruptcy, which created turmoil in the supply chain. The subcommittee is interested in how the FMC assesses agreements and works with industry to prevent other supply chain disruptions and maintain fair shipping practices. MARAD is also with us today. The subcommittee shares jurisdiction over MARAD with the Armed Services Committee, having jurisdiction over the non-national security aspects of the merchant marine. This subcommittee understands the critical role U.S. mariners have in supporting domestic shipping operations, as well as defense operations, including the Maritime Security Program and Sea Lift. The subcommittee looks forward to working with MARAD on these important issues. And I now yield to my ranking member, Garamendi. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your interest in beginning the process of writing a new 2-year Coast Guard Maritime Transportation Authorization Bill. I look forward to working with you again and with the committee members in the same successful that we've had in the past. I'd also like to welcome our witnesses, the U.S. Coast Guard, Maritime, and the Federal Maritime Commission, Maritime Administration. It's my expectation that this hearing will be but only the first of several exchanges as we work collaboratively to build and shape U.S. maritime policy to meet the many challenges and uncertainties in the world today. In fact, we are in a very, very turbulent and challenging time in the maritime world. Foremost, I remain extremely concerned about the reported $1.3 billion, 14% cut to the Coast Guard budget. The new administration has floated it. If they're serious, it's a pretty good example about the cost, knowing the cost of everything, but the value of nothing. There's little doubt that the administration heard the outcry from members of Congress. Mr. Chairman, you were leading all of that. However, if the administration thought the release of its fiscal year 18 skinny budget would somehow allay our concerns, no, didn't happen. We remain deeply, deeply concerned about any cut to the Coast Guard. If there's perhaps one thing we could do to respond to the uncertainties that we confront in the maritime domain, it would be to make certain that the Coast Guard is fully funded, even at a higher level than last year. Furthermore, if we are to be sincere in our commitments to protect our maritime borders, as well as to ensure the reliability, safety, and security of the U.S. maritime supply chain, we'll need to work tirelessly to prevent any short-sighted budget policy becoming a reality. I believe this is probably our first and foremost task ahead of us, but there are many, many others. For one, the global oversupply of container ships and the bottoming out of shipping rates have created turmoil in the global container shipping market, bankruptcies, mergers, acquisitions, and on of this going on at a dizzy pace. We need to know, how will this transformation affect robust competition, fair pricing for the maritime transportation services and foreign trade? In addition, what collateral effects on U.S. marine terminal operators, escort tugs, and other marine service providers will result from the alliances and all of the shifting that's going on in that sector? The status and future of the U.S. flag fleet in the international trade also remains a great concern, especially whether this fleet and its credentialed mariners that are on board will remain capable of providing the reliable, secure sea lift capacity for our military. I bring our attention to last week's hearing with the Transportation Command and the concerns that they expressed about that. In closing, Mr. Chairman, we must begin now to rebuild our merchant marine and the U.S. flag presence in global shipping. The United States has been, remains, or should remain, a maritime nation. Our future, our prosperity, and our security depends upon it. I'm optimistic that the Build America, Buy America mantra of this administration applies equally to the U.S. maritime industry, and, assuming so, I extend my hand in cooperation to help that come to pass. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like also to enter into the record a report from my Maritime Advisory Committee that met out in Vallejo, California at the California State University Maritime Academy. If I could put that in the record for the edification of not only myself, but the staff and anybody else that would like to access that. Many different recommendations that they made, some of which I'm sure will find its way into legislation. With that, I yield back.
Thank the ranking member, and out of sorts here, but we are joined by the ranking member of the full committee, and if Mr. DeFazio has anything to say, feel free to have an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your holding this hearing, and I would echo the concerns of both the chairman and the ranking member as regards the neglect that we've seen of the Coast Guard's needs in the budget proposals. The rumored $1.3 billion cut to build a stupid wall that won't make our country any safer would just be outrageous. I mean, the French built the Maginot Line, the Germans went around it. Even if the so-called beautiful wall is built across some very rugged terrain, obviously they can tunnel under it, they can use catapults and send drugs over it, they can use drones to send drugs in, et cetera. It's not going to solve any national security problem. But it would open up the same route the Germans used to invade France to drug smugglers, human smugglers, and potentially terrorists trying to get a tactical nuclear weapon into the United States, which is we would leave our vast coastal areas, 95,000 miles and 28,000 miles of navigable inland waterways. It would be open season because the Coast Guard wouldn't be able to provide the coverage we need. They're struggling now with their current budget to provide that coverage. So if those cuts are a reality, it would be perhaps the most laughable thing, but serious, unfortunately, about the so-called budget proposals and the skinny budget, which doesn't mention the Coast Guard whatsoever. I also want to echo the concerns of Ranking Member Garamendi about U.S. flags. He's showed tremendous leadership there. I mean, we can't be the greatest nation on earth and a great maritime nation without any maritime under our own control. Alliances are of tremendous concern. I think we should revisit the antitrust immunity that's been granted under law, limited as it is. Apparently, it may be that the Box Club, was even exceeding, shall we say, the limited antitrust immunity. But as they were all handed subpoenas, much to their surprise, the meeting at the Four Seasons. And hopefully we can get to the bottom of what they're really up to. But in terms of denying ports or marine terminal operators, contracts, when you get down to 3 alliances or 2 alliances, and alliances controlled substantially by foreign interests, I believe it presents national security issues, certainly economic issues, and it merits more attention by this committee. With that, Mr. Chairman, thanks for the hearing, and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. I'm going to introduce the witnesses now, starting with the Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Paul Zukunft, Master Chief Stephen Cantrell, Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, Mr. Michael Corey, Acting Chairman for the Federal Maritime Commission, and Mr. Joel Zabit. Good. Executive Director in lieu of the Administrator for the Maritime Administration. Admiral, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Hunter and Ranking Member Garamendi and distinguished members of this subcommittee. Thank you. I thank you, Chairman, especially for your unwavering support of the United States Coast Guard, and I ask that my written statement be entered into the record. The Coast Guard is first and foremost an armed service that advances national security objectives in ways no other armed service can. It begins with our broad authorities, over 60 bilateral agreements to enforce rule of law on the high seas and into the territorial waters of foreign nations where transnational criminal organizations thrive, and they directly threatened our nation's security. We are witness to illicit trafficking destined for the United States, exploiting vulnerable transit nations in Central America, spawning violent crime, and bringing corruption and sowing the seeds of illegal migration. People fleeing their countries of origin to seek safe refuge here in the United States. In 2016, we removed a record 201 metric tons of cocaine, and we brought 585 smugglers to justice here in the United States, where we have a nearly 100% prosecution rate as compared to the less than 10% prosecution rate in their countries of origin. Our greatest challenge in this campaign is one of capacity, and we must maintain our current pace in recapitalizing the Coast Guard fleet while advancing shore-based unmanned aerial systems to enhance our surveillance capacity. Also in 2016, we awarded a contract to complete the build-out of our fleet of 58 fast response cutters at an affordable price at Bollinger Shipyards, who delivered the most recent 4 ships with 0 discrepancies. We awarded the acquisition of 9 offshore patrol cutters to Eastern Shipbuilding Group, a down payment for our program of record of 25 of these capable platforms that meet requirements, and again, at an affordable price. And we are cutting steel at Huntington Ingalls Shipyard today on the 9th National Security Cutter. We stood up an integrated program office with the Navy and recently awarded industry studies to commence the build-out of a fleet of 3 heavy and 3 medium icebreakers, all meaningful steps to keep our nation on an accelerated path to deliver the first heavy icebreaker in 2023. And again, thank you, Chairman, and this committee for your leadership and vision in helping us establish this collaborative approach. We also received our 4th consecutive clean financial audit opinion and have minimized acquisition growth and also eliminating timeline slippages in our major acquisitions. Yet readiness, modernization, and force structure challenges inhibit our ability to fully address the asymmetrical threats in our increasingly volatile world. Like the other 4 armed services, the Coast Guard faces the menacing combination of increased mission demands, years of fiscal constraint, and lost purchasing power. The Budget Control Act has eroded our ability to simultaneously execute our daily missions, maintain our contributions to combatant commanders, and preserve our readiness for global contingencies. The Coast Guard is the only armed service that has been funded below the BCA floor in our annualized operations and maintenance appropriation. Our Service Secretary, John Kelly, understands this issue and fully supports the President's call to rebuild all the armed services. And I am working to rebuild our long-overlooked fleet of 35 inland construction tenders with an average age of 52 years. Now, this is critical in sustaining our inland river system and overall maritime transportation system that generates $4.5 trillion of commerce on an annual basis. This fleet is critical to our economic and national security. Finally, we need to grow the Coast Guard. We have had 5 consecutive years of funding offsets in our operations and maintenance account, and over the next 5 years, we need to restore 1,100 reserve billets and bring another 5,000 active duty members into our service while sustaining our more than 8,500 civil servants. I appreciate the unwavering support of this subcommittee to address our most pressing needs. With the continued support of the administration and Congress, the Coast Guard will remain Semper Paratus, always ready. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Commandant, and thanks for what you do for, obviously, the men and women that you represent right now in this room. And Master Chief Cantrell, same to you. A happy coastie is an effective coastie, right? And thanks for what you do for looking out for the men and women and their families and their well-being. 'Cause, you know, when you're on the water or in the air as much as you are, it's tough. So, thank you, Master Chief. You're recognized.
Thank you, sir, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee. It is a privilege to appear before you today to represent the nearly 41,000 active duty and 7,000 reserve members of your United States Coast Guard, who stand the watch every day protecting our nation. As one of our nation's armed services, as well as a law enforcement agency, they represent the finest force we have ever had in our history. In this era of record operational demands and uncertain budgets, these dedicated men and women are charged with maintaining operational excellence around the globe in our own nation's ports and waterways. Performing our missions in a maritime environment is inherently dangerous. Our people operate in the harshest and many times the most unforgiving conditions imaginable, but they are proud to do so every day with a devotion to duty that is something to marvel at. Recent discussions surrounding proposed cuts to the Coast Guard budget have highlighted the importance of a strong relationship with our department. I'm happy to say Secretary Kelly has shown an in-depth appreciation for the hard work performed by Coast Guard men and women. His dedication to ensuring a predictable, supportive Coast Guard budget that reflects commitment to our members and their families is greatly appreciated. And I want to personally thank all the congressional delegations that have visited Coast Guard units, whether within your constituency or elsewhere. Visiting our Coast Guard men and women and speaking with them face-to-face gives you the ground truth about the impacts your decisions are having on even our most junior personnel. It is also great for our units as members show you the pride they feel every day. I also want to thank you for your continued support of our recapitalization efforts, which are making a tremendous impact on national security. Our new platforms are extremely capable and contribute to the efficient execution of our mission and our service to the nation. But we mustn't lose sight of the fact that many of our Coast Guard men and women continue to serve in ships and at stations that are older than their parents or in some cases their grandparents. But the age and deteriorating state of our assets and infrastructure aren't the only challenges the members of our service face. We continue to face quality of life concerns. With many of our workforce serving at remote units, far from bases or other military installations, and in many cases, high-cost coastal areas, access to adequate and affordable housing, medical care, and child care will always be a challenge. It is critically important we find ways to ensure access to these services in these remote areas, especially for the nearly 70% of our members who are married or have dependents. Many times, in addition to pay and benefits, the support programs we provide to members and their families determine how long they remain in our service. I believe we can all attest that we would not be successful in our careers without the love and support of our families. The sacrifices our members and their families make throughout a typical career are tremendous. Yet they continue to volunteer to serve and re-enlist, and not just as individuals, but as a family. Life in today's military presents unique challenges, and our leadership is deeply committed to providing every coastie and their family with unparalleled quality of life as they serve this great country. I'm pleased to have my wife Janet here with me today as a representative of our Coast Guard families and as someone who spends so much of her time devoted to meeting Coast Guard families throughout our service to ensure their voices and concerns are always heard. We will continue to work on improving these support programs and services to ensure our workforce, both married and single, remains Semper Paratus. We must invest in them. It's very easy to look at shiny new ships and aircraft with modern capabilities and assume we have achieved some budget success. However, we cannot forget those soft costs that are so critical to our people and their families. Once again, we're grateful for your support as we address these challenges. I promise to remain steadfast in ensuring these and other quality of life programs are addressed in our budgets, as our current and future workforce depend on us to be their voice. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, on behalf of the men and women of your United States Coast Guard and their families, I thank you for your continued and very public support, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss some of the highlights and challenges Coast Guard women and men face today.
Thanks, Master Chief. And I also want to recognize your wife sitting right behind you, right? Would you like to say a few words? No, just kidding. Okay. You could really attest to the quality of life stuff. She said she wants you gone more, though. That's all right, right? It's all right. Thanks, Master Chief. Mr. Curry, you're now recognized, and I know you've got a role after your opening statement. So maybe if you could, in your opening statement, mention MSP and how you're going to go about looking at availabilities for, sorry, Marat, yeah. Mr. Corey, you're recognized. All right.
Thank you. Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, and members of the subcommittee, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present testimony. And first, I want to recognize my fellow commissioners here today, Commissioner William Doyle and Dan Maffei, Commissioners Dye and Cadero traveling today. With your permission, I'll summarize the prepared remarks, and I request the written testimony together with a copy of our fiscal year 2016 annual report submitted today be included in the record. We are now in the 100th year of operation under the Shipping Act. The FMC mission is to foster and facilitate open, free, and competitive transportation market activity while protecting the shipping public from unlawful, unfair, and deceptive practices with a minimum of government intervention and regulatory cost. Of recent note, on March 6th, the Commission unanimously approved a new rule to reduce the complexity, burden, and cost for the 165 ocean carriers and the 6,200 ocean transportation intermediaries who file 53,000 contracts and over 730,000 contract amendments with the agency each year. I intend for this deregulatory effort to continue as we take up other pending and proposed issues. After consulting with my fellow commissioners, I've designated the FMC's Managing Director, Karen Gregory, as the Regulatory Reform Officer. She is now standing up a task force to execute on the regulation review process. 2016 was indeed a full and challenging year for the ocean shipping industry. A series of mergers by vessel operators saw the top 20 carriers consolidated into 17 companies. These consolidations further led to a reshuffling of the 4 carrier alliances serving the U.S. trades. By mid-2018, with all announced mergers, there will be 10 companies arranged into 3 operating alliances as they carry 82% of containerized cargo across all U.S. trade lanes. Even with these developments, the vessel liner industry is still relatively unconcentrated. The top 3 carriers in the U.S. trades have market shares, of 12.42%, 12.39%, and 10.62% respectively. These are far from market dominant positions, and in fact, we are not close to a concentrated market in accepted economic regulatory terms. Individual alliance members do not coordinate on marketing or pricing under their operational agreements. The Commission's ongoing monitoring of all alliance activity serves to ensure that the U.S. container trades remain open and competitive. The alliance operations do create vessel utilization efficiencies and lower cost structures that directly benefit U.S. exporters, importers, and our U.S. competitors. All that being said, concerns about these trends have been expressed by U.S. cargo interest, our exporters and importers. All these new alliances have been filed at the Commission over the last year. We have strengthened all of our economic review processes and required tighter limits on the scope of each agreement's authority. Seaport efficiency and port congestion received significant attention by the Commission over the last several years. The Supply Chain Innovation Team, led by Commissioner Rebecca Dye, has been developing information sharing protocols that should prove extremely beneficial in integrating the global supply chain and provide a boost to the American economy. Regarding our budget, the FMC is a small agency with a focused mission and a specialized workforce of 127 dedicated employees. 88% of our budget is rent and salaries. Much of the remainder is fixed overhead. I will focus our resources on the core statutory mission of the agency, and when necessary, I will reallocate resources to address mission-critical needs. In summary, the maritime container supply chain is commercially and operationally complex. As international imports and exports grow, increased cargo volumes will continue to stretch this supply chain. The FMC's role is to ensure that the market for container shipping services remains open, competitive, free from unlawful, unfair, or deceptive practices, but again, with a minimum of government intervention and regulatory cost. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. Mr. Sabat, you are now recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the Maritime Administration's programs to foster and develop the maritime industry of the United States. Our military relies on U.S. flag ships crewed by volunteer American civilian mariners to move our warfighters, equipment, and supplies whenever and wherever they need to go. 3/4 of MARAD's budget goes to national security and ensuring that America has a viable commercial merchant marine, one that employs enough qualified merchant mariners through 3 programs: the Jones Act, the Maritime Security Program, MSP, and cargo preference. The Jones Act ensures a U.S. flag fleet in domestic trade by requiring American-built, owned, and crewed vessels to transport passengers and cargo between U.S. ports. MSP and cargo preference guarantee a U.S. flag fleet in international commercial trade. Combined, these 3 programs support 97 large commercial ships in the domestic trade and 81 large U.S. flag commercial ships trading internationally. There is also a federally owned surge fleet, the first cargo ships out of port in a mobilization or a crisis. MARAD has 3/4 of the ships in this surge fleet. When mobilized, MARAD's 46 ships are crewed by volunteer civilian mariners from the U.S. flag commercial fleet. As the commercial fleet has shrunk in recent years, it no longer employs enough qualified, available American mariners to sustain a full sea lift. MARAD is preparing a range of options to address the mariner shortfall as Congress required by the House Fiscal Year 2017 Transportation HUD Appropriations Report language. We are closely cooperating in this effort with our military partners in the U.S. Transportation Command and the Military Sea Lift Command. MARAD holds another 50 ships in the National Defense Reserve Fleet. Some are held for spare parts, others are being prepared for recycling, and some can be activated if needed. These NDRF vessels include 6 training ships used by the state maritime academies. MARAD has worked on a common design to replace the old training ships as they age out. We are also investigating other potential alternatives. The largest and oldest ship, SUNY Maritime's Empire State, is due to age out in 2019. Massachusetts Maritime's training vessel is 2 years behind. Texas Maritime also needs a large training vessel. No decision has been made about the federal government's role in replacing or overhauling these training ships. The education component, representing 17% of our budget, is primarily for the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, the federal flagship of the maritime academies. Over 20% of the officers in the U.S. Merchant Marine and over 70% of the merchant mariners who have a military service obligation come from the academy. In order to graduate, midshipmen train for a year on American commercial and sometimes federal ships. This unique partnership with industry is a core part of the USMMA training, known as Sea Year. Last June, former Secretary Fox made a decision to suspend Sea Year as part of an effort to combat sexual assault and sexual harassment at the Academy. Working with MARAD, industry and labor partners have developed new standards to address sexual assault and sexual harassment. Companies representing 60% of our Sea Year commercial capacity have already met the standards and have resumed training midshipmen. By summer, we will roll out best training practices developed with the industry. Last June, the Academy was put on warning for accreditation. 7 requirements have to be met to remove the warning. The Academy was required to do more to address sexual assault and sexual harassment on campus and at sea. The other 5 requirements are primarily about restoring authorities that were taken from the Academy's leadership after financial and operational shortcomings were uncovered in 2008 and 2009. The accreditors visited the campus last week. We anticipate that by July, we will know if our progress has been satisfactory. Finally, MARAD's transportation programs comprise 8% of our budget. Since 2009, the DOT's discretionary grant programs have also provided valuable resources. Among these are Tiger and Fast Lane grants, helping shippers expand and improve ports and intermodal infrastructure. We're also working on programs like deepwater port licensing to export oil and liquefied natural gas. The Delfin LNG project will be the nation's first deepwater port export facility to export billions of cubic feet of liquefied natural gas to foreign markets. Our Marine Highways program is also helping us to maximize our underutilized maritime assets, rivers, lakes, and waterways, to transport more cargo and to reduce congestion on our roads, highways, and rails. That is the thumbnail view of MARAD. I ask that my written statement be entered into the record. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, sir. We'll start with questions. I'm going to start with myself. Recognize myself here. Okay, Commandant, here's the opening. I guess my opening that kind of overstates and underscores what's happening in this administration and why you're here today. Tomorrow, there's a meeting on our other committee, the Armed Services Committee. There's a meeting with all the service chiefs, except for you. So every service chief will be there. Of the 5 military services, of which you said in your opening statement you are first and foremost a military service, you're not going to be in that hearing. Why is that? Why are you here and not in the Armed Services hearing tomorrow with your service chief peers? Instead, you're here with the FMC and MARAD. It seems incongruous.
I'll answer the question as frankly as possible. 4% of my budget is funded by defense discretionary. 96% of it is non-defense discretionary, which then comes under the oversight of these other committees. So I typically testify with the other service chiefs when it comes to matters of personnel. And the last time we had a commandant testify with the other service chiefs was with the repeal of don't ask, don't tell. But in budgetary matters, we do not have a seat at that table.
But when it comes to national security, and it comes to the National Security Plus Up right now, which is not being called that, it's mostly national defense, meaning the other 4 services. I think which hearings you sit in and which table you sit at plays a role in how you're perceived by the military establishment, by the Department of Defense, and by the American people. So, I guess this, would you want to be at that table tomorrow?
Yes.
So let's take this to where you talked about increasing personnel. You said increase in 5,000 personnel. Let me see. This NDAA, this Authorization Act, of which you're not included, only a very small part of it, because you are non-defense discretionary instead of defense discretionary. Let me see. The bill increases the end strength of the Army. The Army was going to go down to 460,000. It keeps it at 476. So basically an increase of 16,000. The Air Force got an active duty increase to 321,000 of about 4,000. And the Marine Corps was authorized to bump up of an increase of 3,000. That's all happening now. Like that's happening for next fiscal year. That's going to be included in this National Defense Authorization Act. Have you requested to move to expand your numbers?
When the original executive order came out, I did send a letter to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and provided a list of plus-ups that we would need that meet defense requirements. And part of that is an increase to recapitalize the 6 patrol boats we have over the Northern Arabian Gulf. So we have submitted a request. I have not received a reply.
You asked for 6 FRCs from CENTCOM?
To support
is that what you're referring to? To be included in OCO funding?
Right, and any additional plus-ups, any supplemental funding.
And And what have you seen to either them saying yes or no to those 6 FRCs?
I've not received a reply.
So you don't know yet whether that's going to be included in their OCO request?
I do not.
Okay. Going back to, there was an article a few days ago where Admiral Michel, the Vice Commandant, said that there was only one skinny budget, this is a quote, was delivered to Capitol Hill, and when you look at that, that's a sustainment budget for the Coast Guard. That's something we can work with, and that's what we're marching forward on. The other 4 services are requesting a lot more than you are. They don't want a sustainment budget, and that goes in line with the President saying that we are going to build up the U.S. military. Yet your Vice Commandant is saying that you're fine with a sustainment budget right now, that you're not asking for an increase. I guess my question is, which one is it?
Well, a sustainment budget still funds us below the Budget Control Act, so I cannot take delight in a budget that continues to fall short of our annualized requirements in operations and maintenance, and also the critical need to continue the pace with which we are recapitalizing. Our current level of service are old ships and an underfunded and undermanned service.
So you say that Admiral Michel was not speaking on behalf of the Coast Guard, just his view?
I would say part of that is taken out of context. It was looking at the potential of a 14% reduction and to remove that lodestone from around our neck, but it still leaves us stooped over with the other burdens that we have to carry.
So you want more than a sustainment budget?
I do.
My last thing is something we've touched on a whole lot, icebreakers. Let's talk icebreakers. You only have one U.S.-made Jones Act icebreaker in the United States, the IVIC. And I know we've talked offline and online about this. I think Congress is prepared to support trials, longer-term trials, if Homeland Security is willing to support you by starting this process off to build the requirements and do the operational evaluation and R&D so you can build the requirements so you know exactly what you want in an icebreaker. Where are we in that?
So we have written letters. Most recent was written on the 21st of February to the owners of the IVIC. We provided them with criteria of what sea trials would entail. And we would really like to sit down, with the owners at the bargaining table to look at what all of this would entail, and more importantly, what are the costs? Because the cost is of great concern to me, and if we're going to go any further than this, we will need top-line relief to be able to move forward. So this is a funding availability as much as anything else, but we are ready to roll up our sleeves, work with the offerer, and then walk them through. We've been in this business for going on 70 years of ice breaking. They're new to the business. We know a lot about it, and I think a lot of value could be made by us sitting with the owners with our experience and what this platform would need to be able to do to support our national security objectives.
What's preventing that, by the way? What's preventing the sit down with the owners?
We're waiting. I have written letters. We've received a few emails, but we are reaching out to the owners to have this discussion, which is really where I would like to have this discussion at the bargaining table, and preferably we can take some of that burden off your shoulders as well. But we have already committed ourselves in writing to have these discussions.
Have you gotten any reassurances from Homeland Security that the big department is willing to find funding for this? If it works?
We have not had that level of discussion yet until, again, we can sit down with the owner and look at, we haven't even talked dollar figures of what all's entailed. So we need to do our homework first before I can present a package to the department.
Okay. Very quickly, Mr. Corey, if you don't mind, we'll submit questions to you for the record. Is there anything else you want to say besides your opening
I just
statement?
want to say, not only for the record, but commit to every member of the committee that be happy to come and meet personally and answer any and all questions that they may have. And I listened to every one of the opening statements. So please, we will be available to answer every question. Thank you. I just have a hard stop on.
I got you. And hopefully for you and Mr.
Is he departing, Mr. Chairman?
He is. He's
okay, that's unfortunate, because I do have some questions and very serious concerns about their actions regarding these alliances. So I would appreciate.
to Mr.
Okay, do you have a
DeFazio.
couple of minutes? I can
Have
talk
at
real
him.
fast.
He's going to leave at 3:30.
And you can give brief answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So now we're going to have these foreign alliances controlling 90% of the container market to the Pacific states. You know, aren't you concerned about the potential for antitrust collusion here? Yes or no? Maybe?
We need to understand.
No, I understand the limitations of your authority, but you could have disapproved and had legal action. So the question is, you let it go through. What are you going to do to mitigate it? You've told some of our operators, this is another question, that the tug people shouldn't worry about their inordinate influence because you are going to review any jointly negotiated contract between the Alliance and U.S. tugboat operators. The FMC, I'm not aware, has the authority to do that. Do you have the authority to do that?
Can I answer the first question first and then second question?
Yeah, if
please?
you've got to be brief, so yeah.
One needs to understand the nature of these alliances. They are purely operational. They do not have any price-setting agreement or discussion in any shape, form, or fashion.
The Box Club, who are all just subpoenaed, what were they doing?
Well, Congressman, with all due respect, you must know more about what the Department of Justice is doing than I do, because I have no idea what Department of Justice.
Well, they have these famously, I mean, there is no one in the industry who thinks these people aren't getting together in the room and colluding over pricing and who's going to control what harbors, what marine facilities, what they're going to do. I mean, it's Pollyannish to think, oh, these alliances are just to help make the industry more efficient. 20 years ago, that might have been true. It's not true today, and they are foreign controlled.
If I could just go through a few numbers very quickly for you without going into weeds, and not to be argumentative, Congressman. And you and I have met earlier, and I'm more than happy to come back to your office and spend as much time with you and staff as may be necessary. But as we go down, there are 5,000 container vessels in the world. There are 2,600 vessels that operate, are owned by the companies in the alliances. The alliance activity itself is only 887 vessels, meaning all the rest of the vessels are not in alliance activities. There are only 578 vessels for all of the alliances together in the U.S. trades. That means that you have over 2,000 vessels. Now, one of the core antitrust principles is the market contestable, and is there entry that can come in case prices go up and become too competitive or too remunerative? Are vessels going to come in and discipline that price? There are, again, 578 alliance vessels serving U.S. trades, and there are 2,000 vessels to discipline the U.S. Worldwide, there are 4,000 vessels available to come in and discipline the trades.
Can I just for a moment, if you want to keep talking, but can we focus on where these vessels are serving? I believe a large number of the alliances happen to be serving China, the alliance vessels, and Japan. Doesn't that create some questions? I mean, well, the Chinese also have, they're going to control who can come in and come out. So we now have a Chinese-controlled alliance, and they're going to want to favor that for, as they do famously. And so, I mean, there's this, all these other people could come in, except, well, the Chinese probably aren't going to load their ships or let them into their harbors. I just think that this is really going too far. I mean, at what point will we think we're too concentrated? When we get to 2 or 1 alliances?
Well, sir.
That controls everything. So anyway, Mr. Curry, I realize you've got to go. We can perhaps have another meeting to discuss this, but I really think that we need to revisit the Act. We need to revisit the assumptions that we're creating efficiency and market forces here in these modern times, where we know that state-owned enterprises and governments that are acting in a mercantilist way are not really interested in competition, and they're interested in driving down their costs and dominating our markets and putting our people at a disadvantage. That's my opinion. You may have a totally different one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I could, just one last comment, Mr. Chairman, and I will answer all of the questions in writing with much more specificity. But in terms of concentration, it was in my written statement and my oral statement. The Trans-Pacific trades, China, all of Asia over to the U.S. West Coast. The standard initial measurement that every regulator uses, the Department of Justice, Federal Trade Commission, and the Federal Maritime Commission, is what's called the Hirschman-Herfindahl Index, and it measures concentrations in markets. The Trans-Pacific, where the standard is, anything from 0 to 1,500 is deemed safe harbor, sufficiently unconcentrated that it does not normally warrant scrutiny. From 1,500 to 2,500 is mildly concentrated and then above. Our Bureau of Trade Analysis says in 2016 the Trans-Pacific HHI was 647. Worldwide, the HHI is 849. This is saying that these markets are still unconcentrated. Now, that is only the beginning of a long series of questions that have to be answered in an antitrust review. I'm going to be more than happy to sit down with you, but I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm just trying to say that there are traditional ways that whomever you may ask, Department of Justice, FTA, FTC, or us, these are the principles that if we are to go now into court in front of a federal judge and say, Your Honor, these are the economic indicators we have, and it's the judge, not us, who issues the injunction. So I have to have a solid economic argument to go in front of a federal district judge to convince him or her that we have an economic situation. These are the numbers that we're working with. I'm happy to engage in this to your satisfaction, sir.
Well, I've got to say, just the marine terminal operators, the tug companies, and others who are U.S. residents, U.S. citizens, and operating to the benefit of our country really don't share those views and think it is going to be much more of a anti-market force. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
An idea would be to maybe strip out the limited antitrust exemption that FMC can grant these consortiums, totally. So they aren't allowed to join together to put pressure on the ports, collude on price, which you say they don't do, et cetera. But that's it, Mr. Corey. Thank you. With that, I'd like to recognize Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of you for being here today. Admiral, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about some of the acquisition efforts underway. Obviously, I think all of us up here have strong concerns that the men and women of the Coast Guard have the vessels, the equipment that they need to properly do their job in an increasingly challenging and demanding work environment that many of our coasties are subjected to. One thing I'd love to talk to you about a little bit is the FRC. I know some folks just recently went down, including the ranking member of the subcommittee just went down to take a look at that. You mentioned in your testimony in the last 4 vessels that were delivered, there were no discrepancies. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Is that common?
Rare.
Okay, thanks. Cost per copy, how is that looking compared to estimates?
So we renegotiated phase 2, and this came in at a very affordable range.
So costs going down, no discrepancies. Do you see and you recently, as you know, awarded Eastern to do the OPCs. Do you see benefits to the Jones Act in regard to the quality of vessels that you're getting? Meaning, because of these companies' efforts to build domestic vessels and just making sure we have a robust defense industrial base, do you see benefits to the Coast Guard, to the government, and the American public as a result of that?
Congressman, absolutely. I have been to Bollinger Shipyard as well. And even in this job market today, I wouldn't call it jobs, I would call it skills. And there are still certain skills that are lacking in this country. If we ever found an opportunity where we need to increase our shipbuilding capacity, but it's imperative that we continue to retain these skills and, more importantly, continue to build these skills as a maritime nation.
Thank you. Move on a little bit, but staying in shipbuilding realm. The Coast Guard authorization bills, last few of them, have included provisions that require that smaller fishing vessels now comply with the standards of different classification societies. As a result of that, in Louisiana, second biggest commercial fishing industry in the United States, we have not seen new vessels being built. None, because in many cases they tell us it's cost prohibitive. I've got concerns about two different things there. One, whether those standards are appropriate for fishing vessels. Number two, NIOSH, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, provides accidents per region for different incidents that happen on fishing vessels. However, it's not broken down by the type of fishing that's being done. And so I'm a little bit concerned that this data is not properly conveying the information that we need. For example, you know, is it the deadliest catch folks that are truly running into the most accidents or problems, or is it swamp people that actually don't really use vessels that are classified? But in any case, I was looking for another show. But does that make sense? I mean, is it shrimp fishing? Is it king crab fishing? And getting a better understanding of which type of vessels or industries are actually having the higher number of accidents where perhaps there should be some intervention or looking to try and reduce accidental rates?
First of all, before there's any intervention, we engage with all stakeholders. We have a fishery advisory committee that we consult with as well. And there is proposed regulations, but you know, those are being held back right now under an alternative safety compliance plan and what the impact of that would be. My only concern in all of this, and I've worked in both fleets, is when we have a Gulf fleet vessel be reconfigured and now is operating up in the Bering Sea. And so that would be the only case. But as you mentioned, you know, the cavalry rates speak for themselves. It is a safe fishery in the Gulf of Mexico. At the end of the day, you know, we want to not impede their livelihoods.
Well, Admiral, I just appreciate if we get a commitment out of you to work with us on finding the right solution there. I'm not sure that some of the Coast Guard auth provisions that are in law today are necessarily as prescriptive as they should be based upon the different fishing industries we have in different regions of the country. And I'd appreciate if we could work together with you to try and take a fresh look at that and see if we can find the right solution there.
Congressman, you have my commitment that we will work with the stakeholders and with the fleet owners as well.
Great, thank you. In my last 10 minutes, I just wanted to cover the icebreaker. I know that the chairman noted icebreaking capabilities. You and I have discussed that as well. I think that there is just complete support among the members of this committee about our strong concerns about the lack of icebreaking capability in the United States compared to other Arctic nations. We've talked at length about the idea of the Coast Guard obviously acquiring additional capabilities, new capabilities, and again, I think everyone here fully supports that. The problem that I think most of us see is that there's this interim gap where we simply don't have capabilities. If there were an incident up there, we've already seen Russian aggression up in the Arctic area. Their capabilities, if I remember right, are, 40 times more than we have in the United States. Extraordinary difference in capabilities. Chairman Hunter noted the need to develop an interim strategy while we can currently work on this long-term strategy for acquisition. And I once again would like to reiterate the chairman's comments and support for that, but I'd like to hear commitment from you that we're going to figure out how to work through this and develop an interim strategy. And I'm not going to dictate any type of path forward on that, but we have got to get interim capabilities because we simply have insufficient capabilities for this interim period where we can currently work on long-term acquisition of an icebreaker.
And my reply to that is we're working with one and the only U.S. offerer right now that might be able to bridge this gap. But what if it can't meet that requirement? Then where do we turn to? We may have to look at other sources as well if we are, in fact, looking at a lease option. But again, we are fully engaged, ready to sit down with the offerer and put all the pieces on the table of what it would take to make sure that this vessel could meet our requirements in the high latitudes.
No, Admiral, I think every time you've come before this committee, this issue has come up. There's strong concerns on both sides of the aisle here about this interim solution. I think all of us are willing to work with you on it, but I just want to push again that we need to see some substantial progress on finding a path forward for the interim solution here. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank the gentleman. The ranking member, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Graves, I almost was in your district at the shipyard.
No, you were in the district, in between
I
New
passed
Orleans,
through your
that's right.
district.
Yeah.
Your boosterism is appreciated and correct. It really was quite an experience. And
The nice area was ours, just to be clear. So.
Admiral, thank you. Your team did a great job on the Codell that we did last weekend. The opportunity to see the fast response cutter, and then also over at Panama City, both of them moving along. I would appreciate a report on the progress in both, particularly the latter, the offshore patrol cutter, where it stands. I noticed some of your testimony covered it, but if you could provide some detail on that in the days ahead, it would be much appreciated. Or you can give us a quick rundown now.
I'd be pleased to provide that report. And the date to keep in mind is delivery of the first ship in the year 2021.
2020 for the offshore.
2021 for the first offshore patrol cutter.
Very good. We'd want to watch that closely and monitor it along and any hiccups or slowdowns. But it was impressive to see what was going on there. The many questions. I want to just take a moment on the budget cuts. Proposed, $1.3 billion. Please give me the top 3 problems that it would create for the Coast Guard.
Well, I begin with the acquisition of our 9th National Security Cutter because that would be removed. We've already awarded long lead time materials. Steel is already being cut. We would incur a contract penalty and probably would face a penalty in the amount of what this offset was designed to provide. $500 million. So there's no net savings there.
That's one.
It would cut our department's only counterterrorism capability. It has taken us the better part of 6 years using SEAL tactics training procedures, recruiting the best talent to stand up these teams, and under this proposal, we would lose that capability as well. And you don't lose these immediately. These are people, these are billets, and there's dollar figures assigned to them, and they don't leave overnight, even if you do a reduction in force. We enjoy the highest retention rate of any armed service. But our service members look to me as though I have broken faith as their leader. They look to me as their leader, nobody else, that I have broken faith with them. And then what does that do, as we heard from the Master Chief, to the men and the women of the Coast Guard and to their families, that their commandant broke faith. And I will not break faith with our people, but it does have an impact.
Okay. I want to dwell on that for just a moment. Chief, you, in a conversation, indicated that it's important to have the men and women of the Coast Guard parallel, be equal to the benefits, pays, increases in pay, other benefits that the other 4 branches of the military has. Could you comment on that?
Yes, sir, and we do. We follow suit with DOD on all pay and benefits entitlements. We are eligible for to go to their military treatment facilities and all those benefits of being an armed service. Where I get concerns is we are in a buildup of the military and we're not included in that discussion. We have a young man or young woman that's considering joining the armed service. If they look to which service, if you would, is being invested in and they don't see the United States Coast Guard, do they choose not to come to our service? And that's something that as we grow or want to grow over the next few years, that talent is out there, and we're already in competition with our sister services on getting that right talent and not just recruiting them, but keeping them in our service, which is why these other housing and medical and child care and those things that some folks just don't think about that will make them leave our service, and we certainly don't want that. But we want to be part of that buildup, sir.
Okay. I want to come back to that, and the chairman mentioned the hearing next week with the four other services. Perhaps it's that, Admiral, you need to be invited. So maybe we can do some of that.
And if I can, Ranking Member, right now our ice-breaking program, to recapitalize that, is being funded by the Department of Defense. The Coast Guard is at every COCOM. Every geographic combatant commander has Coast Guard forces chopped to it as well. And so, yes, we do need to be a part of these discussions if we're talking about building the force for the 21st century.
When Secretary Kelly was the commander of Southcom, he seemed to think that the Coast Guard was really important. But yet it is his budget that takes $1.3 billion out of your budget. I suspect well, let's hope he still thinks that the Coast Guard's important. Didn't he say that the southwest border is is 1,500 miles south of the United States border?
If we talk all borders, our maritime borders begin well south and well beyond, and actually east and west as well, thousands of miles.
If you are interdicting drugs off the coast of Colombia, what impact does that have in the Guatemala, Honduras area with regard to immigration from those countries into the United States? Is there an impact?
So it's insidious the way this works. Colombia, the #1 producer of cocaine. I met with President Santos 3 weeks ago. Can they cut back coca production? Can they step up their efforts? It's moved in bulk to Central America. And as soon as it lands in bulk in Central America, corruption goes up, rule of law goes down, and those who can afford a human trafficker will put their young children in a human trafficker to get them into the United States, the #1 consumer of cocaine. So the irony is it is our consumption that drives the shipment that creates this violent situation in Central America, and yet now people want to migrate to the United States. So this is this is as much about behavioral health as it is about law enforcement interdiction. It needs to be a campaign, and we need to tackle both of these.
We're going to need to make an argument that a wall on the Mexican border isn't going to stop immigration or the drug issue. It's going to have to be a multiple program, including the Coast Guard in that. We'll make that argument a little later. I do want to go to the Maritime, excuse me, not the Maritime, but Mr. Salzman. Last week we had a hearing on the Armed Services Committee with General McDew. I believe you're familiar with his testimony in which he spoke to the issue of the the real problem that exists today in the lack of mariners and the lack of ships, both the Ready Reserve as well as the MSP. You touched upon that. Is there a solution?
Congressman Garamendi, thank you for raising that important issue. Short answer is yes, there is. And I would also say that there is no daylight between us and the U.S. Transportation Command on this issue. In many respects, the Maritime Administration serves as a component command of the U.S. Transcom in providing 46 of the 61 vessels that they need out of the surge fleet.
We are aging out both the ships, the Ready Reserve ships, as well as the sailors on those ships. What do you suggest we do about that?
Well, Congressman, we have as I mentioned in my testimony, the Maritime Administration is responsible to Congress to come back with a list of options. And we owe it to our new political leadership team as they come on board to vet those options to determine what the recommendations would be. So I cannot speak to our recommendations, but I can speak broadly to what the range of options are. The policy that we have followed for years in the United States is that we rely on the commercial U.S. merchant marine to employ and train enough mariners to serve on both those commercial vessels, but also to generate a surplus that we use on the federal vessels to meet our sea lift requirements. The challenge that we have today is that the U.S. commercial fleet is no longer large enough to provide both of those needs. So the one of the two ways forward is logically to increase the size of the U.S. commercial fleet. From my testimony, just by doing the numbers, we estimate we're short about 2,000 of these qualified mariners. You need about 40, 45 additional vessels to do that. So anything that would add those 45 vessels. The two ways that would do that, one, of course, is the expansion of an MSP or an MSP-like program where we include vessels not just for their military capability, but for their ability to serve in commerce, but also to employ enough mariners so that that pool is large enough to meet our national security needs. The second way, which would not involve a direct subsidy or direct stipend to the vessels, would be trade policies that would require additional U.S. flag vessels, whether they're carrying exports, as the bill that you and Chairman Hunter have proposed, or bilateral agreements, as for example with China, would require a certain number of vessels to sail under the U.S. flag. If you take those approach, you could also either reduce or eliminate the shortfall of U.S. flag vessels. So that's one broad category of increasing the size of the U.S. flag fleet. The second category would be to divorce the need for mariners from the requirement that the U.S. flag fleet be large enough to employ them. And then the most direct and obvious approach towards that would be to have the United States Navy or the Maritime Administration employ the additional mariners that were needed. So right now, we rely on the commercial fleet to provide a surplus of 1,300 mariners that we need to draw on within 4 days, within 96 hours of a full sea lift activation. The way to divorce that is to say to the Navy or to MARAD, here are the funds for you to employ 1,300 additional mariners, plus the relief crews that you would need going forward in a sea lift. So there are many sub-options and variations within that, but broadly speaking, those are the options before us to address a mariner shortfall and still rely on the U.S. flag fleet and U.S. mariners to meet our national security needs.
Mr. Chairman, I've gone way over my time, so please excuse me. I'm just going to wrap it up here very quickly. I would request that General McDow's statement from last week's hearing be entered into our hearing record as it pertains directly to this need for American mariners, both for the Ready Reserve Fleet as well as for the MSP. So that would be helpful to understand it. Also, I draw the attention of the committee to one of the solutions that Mr. Salzbot, I said that incorrectly. My apologies, sir. Sabat spoke to, and that is to increase the size of the American merchant marine fleet. And I have some ideas on that, and I've shared that with many of the members already. And that has to do with cargo, and it has to do with trade negotiations. And, for example, if we're going to export a strategic American resource, such as natural gas and oil, it ought to be on American-built ships with American sailors, thus providing a solution to the overarching problem at hand here. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the additional time.
Thank the ranking member. Let me throw in there too. What General McDow talked about, he said TRANSCOM has never looked at the attrition that would take place with a full sea lift call-up when you actually have ships sinking. Their numbers do not account for that, and I don't think yours do either. So they're now modeling what would happen with Korea, what would happen with China, what would happen with Russia or whoever if you actually had to call up everybody to deliver gear during wartime, and they're finally using a model that brings actual wartime attrition into that. And I hope you guys are tied in and in sync with that so that your end numbers would come up the same, roughly.
Yep. Mr. Chairman, yes, we are very much in sync with them.
And by the way, I don't want to we're going to come back around to me. I just wanted to throw that out there so you know what we're looking at. With that, I'd like to recognize Mr. Mass from Florida.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, as the only enlisted man on this subcommittee, I just figured it was my duty to harass you for a little while, Master Chief. So I'll let you have it here. I want to get a little bit into the minutia of your force. I suspect you feel that you field the finest possible force out there?
Yes, sir. Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. And as we know, no matter what happens with cuts, what's asked of you is not going to change. People are still going to expect that you step up and meet the mission. You'd consider that to be accurate?
Yes, sir. We call it the curse of semper paratus. Our folks will find a way, despite budget issues or anything else that's going on, they will find a way to make mission. They know what their job is, and it's something to marvel at. So yes.
It is kind of a curse in that respect. You know, many that have never been a part of the force, they might take for granted that the mission get accomplished because fine folks like yourself always do step up and they accomplish that mission. So like I said, I want to get into a little bit into the minutia of your force, about how many active you have.
Nearly 41,000 active, enlisted and officer.
How many cutters?
Oh, gee. Total?
Sure.
Couple hundred.
A couple hundred? How many boats?
Overall?
Yeah.
Several hundred boats.
Aircraft?
Again, several hundred aircraft, helicopters.
So what does it really look like to that force when you get cut? What does that literally look like to the operational ability of each one of those cutters, those boats? I suspect most of us can agree salt water is not something that's usually that friendly to the equipment that we go out there and field. What actually gets cut? What actually happens to your force and your ability to go out there and conduct that cursed mission?
Well, maintenance always suffers when budget cuts happen, and personnel costs. I mean, those things are easy to cut and they're very expensive. So when we scale back on our personnel and we scale back on the maintenance that they have to provide, those ships and airplanes and small boats get tied up and aren't able to go out and make missions. So we make do with what we have, and it adds extra burden on the folks that are still left around to maintain and do that mission. So it's added workload for them as they will continue to go out and do what we ask them to do.
Very good. Now, what happens with your enlistment? You know, we all know it doesn't matter, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard. You got to balance enlistments and retirements. What's going to happen with your force if we get behind the eight ball in balancing that and your ability to go out there and meet the needs of the future?
Well, right now, we really enjoy a high retention rate in the upper 80s, and it's more than any other of our services. And I believe it's in large part to just people love our Coast Guard mission. They love the way we make an effort to take care of them and their families, and they want to stick around. And I would say personally, I joined the Coast Guard 34 years ago for 4 years, and I'm still here. And it's because of the mission and the people and what we do that keep our people coming back. But we have things like blended retirement and things that are on the horizon that we've got to pay really close attention to as far as retention as we move out over the next decade. But I think for today, our force is happy to be part of the Coast Guard and will remain happy and will continue to re-enlist every time they have the opportunity to.
Maybe I'm just unique. You know, those of us especially, we come from the coastal communities. We see it in the port infrastructure, the ship traffic, you know, watercraft users. You know, we see your work every single day. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your comments. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service.
Mr. Larson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks all for coming. Oh, there you are. Good. I can see you now. So, Admiral, can you? I don't want you to forget that there's a maritime border with Canada as well, especially in my district, and want to emphasize that. And Coast Guard's never forgotten that. I've hopefully helped you not forget that as well. Recent challenges we're facing there have to do more with Canadian efforts to move oil by pipeline to an expanded pipeline in Vancouver, and then it would be put on ships and come down through Harrow Strait and out the Straits of Juan de Fuca, all on the Canadian side. But if something were to occur that resulted in a spill, obviously the spill would not be limited to the Canadian side. So I want to know, I'd like to know how aware you particularly are to this challenge we're facing and what Coast Guard's doing about that.
Thank you, Congressman. And we have regular engagements. We've been having these now for probably close to 2 decades now with Canada Coast Guard, with Transport Canada, with the RCMP. But to the specific concern that you raise, and especially if it involves tar sands and the like, and when that enters a maritime environment, as you well know, it sinks. And the oil spill technology is nascent at best in terms of an ability to remove a product that is heavier than water, and now it is spreading throughout the environment. So it's a technical challenge for us. It's a technical challenge for Canada as well. And an oil spill does not respect any borders, and for the very reason that you mentioned. So it is a concern for me because of the technology that is lacking. We are putting a lot of effort into this oil spill technology, working with oil spill response organizations, whether it's Canada, U.S. It's a concern, though, in your region.
Are you doing this particularly to the proposed project in Vancouver, in British Columbia?
We need to understand, yeah, there needs to be an oil spill response plan. There needs to be a contingency plan that goes with that. There needs to be a responsible party. Some of these governance structures, we have the Clean Water Act, Canada does not. Who's going to pay for that removal? So these are a whole list of concerns, and then finally the ability to remove it, because that is really the biggest challenge that we face right now with these products.
Okay,
excellent. We're not there yet.
Okay, I'd like to do some follow-up with you and your team on that if I could. Just note, it is April, boating season is starting, so your folks will be even busier in the Pacific Northwest, and we always appreciate the great work that they do, both with education of the boating community, the kayaking community as well. But it is coming up, and we look forward to the Coast Guard working with the community up there to maintain the safety of folks out in the water.
Thank you, Congressman. Look forward to working with you as well.
Great, thanks. Sorry, Zabat? Great, thanks. So can you give an update on how many outstanding either letters of commitment or loans the Title 11 program has right now?
When you say commitments for Title 11, we have at the moment, we have one loan that's in the approval. It's been approved and is in the process of a letter of commitment for us to actually put the money out. And then we have 3 other interested parties that are applying for Title 11 loans.
Okay, and how about on the outstanding side?
I mean, that's that universe of 4 is our universe right now.
It is you. Okay, great, thanks. And then with regard to small shipyards, it's been $177 million over the last 8 years, 6, 7 years, allocated for small shipyard grants, including some in my district, including some around the country. None of the shipyards in my area were able to get meet the standard in the last go round, but I think there was $9 million total, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
That is correct, sir.
Allocated, and then the proposed budget proposes zero this particular program out. Is that correct? Do I understand that?
The administration has not submitted a full FY18 budget proposal yet, sir.
All right. Well, if it's anything like the Obama administration, it will be zeroed out, and then we'll have to put money back into it. I think that if I got my numbers right as well on small shipyards, again, $4.9 million in 2016, funding 9 projects. But I understand, was there nearly $100 million or so in requests?
Yeah,
in 16?
Congressman, in your typical year, we're going to get somewhere between 10 and 15 times the request, oversubscription.
In a dollar amount?
Yeah, So in a dollar amount from, 9 million, if it's a $10 million program, we'll get $100 million or more in requests.
Yeah.
And part of that is limited by the fact that the recipients know the program, know that our awards are generally in the $1 million range. And so that's what they're asking for. If we had an unlimited amount, obviously they'd be asking for more money.
Sure, and I'm not going to assume all those requests are perfect or the best requests, but certainly some of them, it's certainly more than what's usually allocated. I guess the point I want to make is that this is the program where there is not just a demand is infinite, as I say, there is a need, And it does exist, and it continues to exist for smaller shipyards around the country, and not just where I'm from. So as we move forward through the budget cycle, and I certainly will be watching this particular program very closely.
Congressman, thank you for drawing attention to the program. Your interest is noted, and of course, I'll be carrying that back to the Department of Transportation.
I'm sure they're waiting with bated breath to hear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zabat, is that how you say that?
Yes, sir.
Pronounce it for me.
Zabat.
Zabat, okay. You may know that I represent the Gulf Coast of Texas over to Louisiana, that other foreign country. And the Texas A&M Maritime Academy is on Galveston Island in my district. We are very proud of that academy and the work going on there, but we're challenged by the limits on their shipboard training capacity. I don't know how familiar you are with the ongoing program there. Do you know that program? Yes. You know about it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. We appreciate the support Merit gives us, provides to the Academy. However, our training vessel, General Rudder, is just too small. In fact, we're forced to outsource the shipboard training portion of our program to what I call the other lesser state, the maritime academies. And while we appreciate that support that those academies provide to us, the cost to our academy and our cadets is pretty substantial. Our new superintendent there, Rear Admiral Mike Rodriguez, tells me that the cost of the academy of outsourcing that shipboard training is more than $2.7 million this year. And that doesn't even include travel costs for the cadets and the faculty or the staff. So, in your view, and I'm glad to hear you saying you're gonna carry a message back to the DOT, but we want you to take it to the guys who are gonna make America great again. See how much stroke you have. In your view, what are the next steps toward ensuring that you're making a note of that? I see that. Take to Donald Trump. What are the next steps in ensuring that each state maritime academy, not just A&M in Texas, but that each maritime academy has shipboard training capacity to fill their missions? What does that take?
Congressman, you raise a very good and a very complicated issue. This is one that both the state maritime academies and the Maritime Administration have been wrestling with now for some years. I mentioned in my testimony that past practice has been for the federal government almost always through surplus vessels in the National Defense Reserve Fleet to provide vessels to the state maritime academies for training. Nowadays, if we were to pursue that option, it would be very, very expensive. To take an old T5 tanker, for example, and convert her into a vessel that would meet modern safety of life at sea standards would be about as expensive as purchasing a newly built vessel in a U.S. shipyard. And both of them are, it's in a tight budget environment, they're both very costly. Complicating that factor, so right now we have putting aside Great Lakes Maritime Academy on a freshwater, which has issues of its own, you have five state maritime academies essentially sharing 4 large ships, because as you note, the General Rudder...
Say that last line again.
5 state maritime academies essentially sharing 4 large ships. As you note, the General Rudder is not a large ship. Yep. And Texas A&M is the fastest growing and will have a need for a large ship going forward. What complicates this from my perspective is the 2 ships with the largest training capacity. The Empire State at SUNY Maritime and the Kennedy at Massachusetts Maritime are the 2 oldest ships and the 2 ships that are slated to age out first. So that there is a time pressure on all of us to identify what the solution is, not just for Texas Maritime, but for all of the state maritime academies going forward.
Well, I appreciate that. We want to know, do you get to have any input with the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, at all?
It is correct to say, Congressman, that we have an input, but I would go back to Congressman Larson's comment and say I'm sure they're waiting for my input with bated breath.
Well, no, I got you. Yeah. Let me jump over to you, Admiral, if I may. My district 14 in Texas, starting in Louisiana, going down not to Freeport, has 5 ports more than any other member of Congress. 60% of the nation's jet fuel is produced in our district. It's energy It's just absolutely huge. The Port of Beaumont, as you may know, moves more military personnel and equipment than any other port in the United States. And that does not include the Houston Ship Channel in my 5 ports, by the way. We have the Sabine-Neches waterway that feeds the Port of Port Arthur and Port of Beaumont. Are you familiar with that area?
Congressman, I am, and in fact, I went out to Cheniere LNG 2 years ago.
Okay.
Before that facility came online, and we're starting to see an increase in shipping traffic at a brand-new facility.
Sure. Well, we would love to see, we've got 2 chiefs' reports, on file, if you will, with the Army Corps. We'd love to see both the Sabine-Neches waterway dredged out and the Port of Freeport as well. So we've got channel improvements on the board. Do those impact the Coast Guard's ability, when we can't get the Neches waterway, Sabine-Neches waterway dredged to the appropriate depth in Freeport, does that impact your ability to carry out your mission? You talked about it earlier.
At present, it does not. We certainly have a responsibility to maintain aids to navigation in these waterways, mark where the good water is, where it isn't. But if it is dredged, then we can anticipate to see increasing shipping traffic.
Absolutely.
And then it becomes a traffic management concern for the Coast Guard.
Okay. Before I yield back, Mr. Chairman, I want to note that we have 2 LNG plants in our district. We're the 13th largest exporting district in the country out of 435 members of Congress before our 2 LNG plants come online, which is just almost any day now. And we have a 3rd LNG plant that is applied for permit and on the drawing board. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Master Chief, it's back to me now, then we'll go to Mr. Garamondi when he gets back. I just want to run this by you, because you're probably the most deeply in tune with the men and women of the Coast Guard, what they're doing, how they live, how their health care is, what they eat, how they go to school. So let me ask you this. Would you say that the men and women of the Coast Guard, when it comes to operational tempo, housing, health care, and mission, are more aligned? And I'm going to use, in this instance, the Navy, and I'm going to read off some comparisons. Do you think that your men and women of the Coast Guard are more aligned with the Navy or the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services?
Neither. I don't think we were aligned with the Navy or with
I mean, does the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services have base housing? No. Do you have base housing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you get BAH?
Yes, sir.
They don't. The Navy does. Navy has base housing. How about, are you on TRICARE or are you on some other kind of civil
TRICARE.
health care? You're on TRICARE,
Yes,
as
sir.
is the Navy. How about CBP, Customs and Border Protection? Do you think that the way that your bases are set up, your operational tempo, your base housing, your health care, is it more in line with the military or is it more in line with CBP?
With the military.
Let's go FEMA. Is it more in line with FEMA or the Department of Defense and the military?
Military.
We can go through this. Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, TSA. Are you more in line with TSA or the military?
Military.
Okay. I think you see my point here, Commandant, and I'll switch to you. It seems like what we're getting hung up in is, would you rather be in the budget pocket of OMB that rules you with an iron fist and treats you as not like a military service, to where the plus-up that's happening right now with this administration does not even mention you, right? You're talking about budgets, or where do you fit as an operational unit, basically, right? And I think we're getting those 2 things mixed up. Where would you best fit if you had your druthers? And I understand you have the first Secretary of Homeland Security that no joke ran Southcom, who worked with Coast Guard every day, especially after the Navy left. Coast Guard became the Navy for him in Southern Command, and basically you were the assets for that combatant command in that area. You have John Kelly right now as your secretary. There's nobody better could be the Homeland Security Secretary for the Coast Guard's budget and for just knowing what you all do. And you're still at a sustainment budget. That's with the best secretary in the world in U.S. history for Homeland Security, is in there right now, and you're at a sustainment budget and not mentioned with the other services, right? Explain to me the differences between where you want to sit budgetarily and where you think that you fit in when it comes to your mission, your tempo, your base housing, your men and women, and what you do for this country national security-wise.
I would just begin with an annually recurring $2 billion acquisition and construction budget. $2 billion. That's not a lot of money in the Pentagon. We need 5% growth in our annualized operation and maintenance, recurring 5% growth. We're bringing new assets on board. And it's great that our acquisition budget is being held up. We can't lose sight of the out-year sustainment costs of that. As a service chief, and I sit with all the members of the Joint Chiefs and with the chairman, and we helped craft a national military strategy, the 4+1, that addresses North Korea, Russia, China, Iran, the Mideast. It doesn't address the Arctic. It does not address the Western Hemisphere. So I look at where the other services are, and then where are they not, and then where do our authorities resonate the most, and I have extreme agility. I don't have to go through an op step. I don't have to go through a tank. I don't have to write a dep board. I just move our ships because I'm also the operational commander for the Coast Guard. I would lose all of that authority if I became a very small component within the Department of Defense. I would much rather be the largest component within the Department of Homeland Security. There will never be a perfect fit. With all of our other statutory authorities, there will never be we're a regulatory service. I doubt the Secretary of Defense wants to be dealing with boating safety. He's got higher priorities. So we always have this regulatory, and a lot of other authorities as well. But our best fit today, Chairman, is with the Department of Homeland Security, but we have got to speak for what our needs are. Part of it is in our culture. We come from a culture of austerity and a culture of offsets. And we need to think of being in a culture of prosperity and growing and not offsetting the Coast Guard. And that is just as much a responsibility of mine as it is for our service secretary. And as you mentioned, we have a service secretary who gets it. And this is the time for us to come out swinging.
I mean, you're talking to a U.S. Marine here, and the Marine Corps used to brag about doing more with less. You had 9/11. Where operational tempo for everybody, including the Coast Guard, skyrocketed, and they finally realized we can't do as much with less. And they're now asking for the moon, and if they get a little bit less than that, then they're happy with it. And if they have to get what they had last year, or just a very small plus up, they can make do. But your funding requests and the President's funding requests in OMB does not match your op tempo and does not match your acquisitions. If you were in the Department of Defense, I think it would match that. You would be given what you needed to accomplish the missions that are statutory for the U.S. Coast Guard. And I think you're kind of stuck somewhere in the middle right now. And I think if you're going to stay in Homeland Security, then you should get more DOD funding and take on more of a DOD role. If you go to DOD, you're not going to lose your other core competencies that are regulatory as opposed to warfighting. But if you stay out of DOD, then you will lose that warfighting edge. I think the best analogy that I've read from an article written by the U.S. Naval Institute is you would never send LAPD to Fallujah, but you can take National Guard from Fallujah and put them in LA if there's riots. Same with Katrina. The military has the ability to come in and do a lot of the natural disasters and humanitarian work that the Coast Guard does. You would team nicely with the Navy, as opposed to losing your warfighting capability but keeping those regulatory capabilities in Homeland Security. I think this is something, I mean, this kind of, people have been talking about this forever. And once again, I think you're in the best position you can be in with the Secretary of Homeland Security and this President, and you aren't seeing the rewards from that like other services are. So there's got to be a disconnect, and I think that disconnect's name is OMB. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, how did we get to where we are today? I'll go back over the last 5 years, since BCA came into effect, and we have been funded in our operations and maintenance budget below the BCA floor. So as we put our budget together, we are directed to identify a 5% excursion from what is already a minimalist budget, and now take 5% off of that as well. And we have done this iteratively for the last 5 years. I'm not aware of my service chiefs, as they're doing their budget bills, say, well, now whack everything off the top. In fact, they're getting supplemental funding through OCO.
And OCO funding.
And so if we just stop with these offset drills that we do year in and year out, we've squeezed everything out of the Coast Guard. The last time we went through this, I'm tying up ships and I'm grounding airplanes because I've already taken everything else out of it. I've shut down pharmacies, I've shut down clinics, I've shut down galleys that affect quality of life at our field units. And every year we go back to say, we need 5% more. And I can't continue to operate this. So one, yeah, we need to change the rule set. This is vital to national security. We can't offset national security. Someone is going to pay the price for it. And I'm not willing to pay the price. What has helped us, Chairman, is the work that you have done. It has been Congress who has restored the Coast Guard. And we'll continue to work these relationships. We have an opportunity with this service secretary who is already engaged at the highest levels as we look at sustaining the Coast Guard in 2018. But we need to do more than just sustain. That keeps us on life support. We need to grow the service and not continue to be in the ICU on life support.
Okay, so last question. Then how then do you reconcile wanting to plus up like the other services are now getting and knowing that you're not going to get it because of OMB? How do you reconcile those two things?
Well, that's pre-decisional right now, and so we'll see how this plays out.
OMB's, first off, they weren't going to leave you sustained. They were going to cut you massively, right? So now they're back to sustainment, but if you were part of the Department of Defense, you wouldn't be seeing that. You'd be seeing more money. So how do you say that we fit the best in the organization that keeps cutting us so we can't do our job? I just don't think it doesn't make sense to me. So how do you reconcile that?
Again, we're an instrument of national security. We cannot see these iterative cuts from the top.
But you're not funded as an instrument of national security.
And these are the dialogues that we're having right now, with our department, and so we don't find ourselves surprised when we see a passback of this magnitude.
Is it possible to be included in defense discretionary funding and still be under Homeland Security?
That's the option that we are exploring right now.
Say it again?
We are exploring that option right now.
What would it take to be considered or defense discretionary?
Defense discretionary. That I don't know. I mean, it would probably take authorization language to be able to do that.
That's law?
Law. To fence off our budget so it does not become subjected to non-defense discretionary offsets.
What if there were strings attached with that where if you're considered defense discretionary and you get extra money, that money is put towards those capabilities which are national security related? Would you have a problem with that?
I would not. What we do today, or every mission set that we do, all 11 of them, touch upon national security.
All right, thank you. Mr. Garamendi, you recognize.
Mr. Chairman, your discussion here is an extremely important one. And it seems to me the solution lies with us. OMB has done its thing, and that's fine. They can suggest, but we're the ones that are actually going to write the appropriation as well as the budgets. And you and I have, for the first time, I think, in a long, long time, you and I also sit on the Sea Power Subcommittee of the Armed Services Committee. And as members of that committee, I think we have an opportunity here to achieve what you said in your last couple of sentences, and that is to work with the Department of Defense budget so that some portion of that plus-up, that additional money, is available to meet the needs of the Coast Guard, the national security issues of the Coast Guard. Not degrading in any way the national security issues dealing with drug interdiction. But also you are deeply engaged in what we might call specific defense issues in the Persian Gulf, for example, and other places. So I think we have an opportunity in that, in our role on the House Armed Services Committee, to see that there's a certain level of funding, if it's $54 billion or whatever the additional funding is, that it becomes available to the Coast Guard for a couple of things, and they're on my mind. That the men and women of the Coast Guard have the same benefit package that the men and women of the Department of Defense have, so that those needs, and that's housing and all of the rest of it. Secondly, that there is money for the ongoing development of the icebreakers, not one, but 3 that we need to build in order to meet the needs that we've talked about so many times in the Arctic, so that we set in place in that Department of Defense, National Defense Authorization Act, and in the appropriations, the money necessary to carry that out, and the other, and to provide specific money for those things that are specific for national, the military side of national defense, so that we can parcel out of the budget, whether it's 4% or 5 or 10 or 15% of your budget, say, okay, here's the OCO funding that you're doing in the Persian Gulf, or wherever else that might be. So I think we have the opportunity, perhaps unique at this particular period of time, because, Mr. Chairman, you and I are on that Sea Power Subcommittee, and we already have a relationship with the Navy with regard to the Coast Guard. I've asked for some specific information, Mr. Commandant, for the scheduling of the money necessary to carry out the Coast Guard program, year 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. And I want to collapse it into 3 years. You can do it, right? If you have the money.
Big if. Yes, sir, I'm all in.
We understand the difficulties there. I want to move to what is, I guess, my, I don't know, it's becoming an obsession. How to build ships in the United States. I mean, ocean-going ships. So, Mr. Zavat, if we could, I want to go through a series of questions with you. You've already spoken to the 78 vessels and probably going down. Has MARAD conducted a formal analysis of the needs and shortfalls it sees in the military sea lift for both ships and seafarers?
Congressman, yes, we have.
Can you broadly describe it, what it is that what your analysis is?
Yes, sir. So as just building off of my testimony, and thank you for raising this, because from our perspective, this is the single biggest issue that the Maritime Administration and our counterparts in sea lift and military side are facing. So we've identified a shortfall, as I said, of about 2,000 mariners, of qualified available mariners in the commercial sector, which equates to, roughly speaking, a shortfall about 45 vessels sailing under the U.S. flag fleet. If we continue to rely, as our policy has been and as it makes sense to have a policy to do, to rely on the U.S. flag fleet to provide those mariners. So the first answer to your question, sir, is yes, we've done the analysis, we've identified the shortfall, and we've identified how many vessels would have to be employed, would have to be added to eliminate that shortfall. That, however, does not address a point that Chairman Hunter had made. We're doing this all under the sea lift requirements that are established by the Department of Defense. And those requirements, as the chairman mentioned, at the moment leave off 2 things. One is that they assume that all vessels would be available 100% of the time if they're sailing commercially or activated in wartime. And we know that even in peacetime, no vessel is available 100% of the time. There's downtime, there's scheduled maintenance, and there's some percentage of breakdowns. But the other important issue that the chairman identified for going forward for the next war plan is that up until this point, really since the end of World War II, we've always been able to assume no attrition with the merchant marine in our future conflicts, which is a bloodless way of saying that we've been able to assume that we would never have ships torpedoed or bombed or destroyed by missiles, and we would not have civilian merchant mariners killed.
Move along here because we're
Yes, sir.
getting near the end of all of this. Can you provide us with both of those scenarios? That is, a peacetime scenario of what our needs are, and then a wartime scenario?
Sir, I cannot provide you with the wartime scenario until we get that from the Department of Defense. I can certainly provide you with the information on the current scenarios that we plan for.
Very good. I would appreciate it if you could do that. As you know, I've introduced a bill, H.R. 1240, which would expand the U.S. flag fleet by requiring a percentage of U.S. crude oil and LNG on American flag vessels. We've talked to you about this. Would this make a difference?
Congressman, yes, it would.
How and why?
So the Government Accountability Office indicated that looking at your proposal, that by around 2025, it would be adding about 100 ships sailing under the U.S. flag for exporting LNG. If I recall correctly, your proposal would be for 30% of that to be sailing on U.S. flag. So that would add the equivalent of 30 vessels to the U.S. flag fleet, which is a huge cut into our deficit of about 45 vessels that we have
Is that
today.
for the LNG?
That is just for the LNG side.
Crude oil, have you done an analysis of what it would mean for crude oil?
A crude analysis, if you will, Congressman.
Very good. I'll accept that.
So currently, we export the equivalent of about one large tanker a day of crude oil. And the challenge here is projecting with the volatility of prices. But if you assume that that stays roughly equal, you're looking at another 30 or so vessels being employed a year if they were all U.S. flag. So again, 30% of that is another 9 or 10 vessels that would be added to the U.S. flag
So
fleet.
how many, once again, for LNG
For LNG, you're looking at 30.
and crude?
And again, a crude estimate for crude is about another 10 as things stand today.
Another
10,
10.
yeah,
All right, so some 40 ships
yes.
that could be built if we were to pursue such a policy.
That's what the numbers would say, yes, Congressman.
We heard from Mr. Curry the issue of bilateral negotiations. I think he mentioned China as an example of a bilateral negotiation. They are set to require that all of the importation of LNG and oil be on Chinese ships. Some of that may be American crude oil and American LNG. I suppose since the president's so intent on bilateral negotiations and he's such a good deal maker, maybe it could be done. I think we've covered it here. You did talk about adding sailors with regard on the military budget, so that's already covered here. I think we've covered those particular issues. The ready reserve capitalization. General McDew said that he would look for ships that are in the worldwide fleet that might be able to replace the ready reserve. Would those be American-built ships?
The ships in the worldwide fleet, Congressman, no, sir. And the challenge with that is just the ships that we have that were built in American shipyards. I think the youngest ship that we have that's sailing currently under foreign flags is about 34 years old. So to General McDew's testimony, as I've heard him talk about, is a mix of having some new builds in U.S. shipyards, coupled with purchasing foreign-built vessels that would, much younger vessels than the average age of our ready reserve force, our surge fleet ships today, which are nearly 40 years old. And I think just to underscore General McDew's point, there has never been a time like there is today in terms of if you want to purchase ships in the international market on the cheap, now is the time to do that. There's a huge surplus of those vessels right now.
We would be purchasing foreign-made ships for a tradition of American-built ships in the ready reserve. I think it's no more than is it also the law?
So, Congressman, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that we would be building foreign flag ships, and yes, in the sense that the law currently requires us to have them built in U.S. shipyards. No, in the sense that the vast majority of the ships that we have in the ready reserve force today were not built in U.S. shipyards. They were brought on board under exceptions or before the law was put in place.
So exception by exception and ship by ship not built in the United States.
So again, I don't want to speak for General McDew, but from what I've heard from his testimony, he's looking for a cost-effective mix, recognizing that it's hard to build any proposal to replace, to recapitalize all 61 ships we have in the surge fleet. MSC has 15, we have 46. It would be hard to justify for new construction for all 61 of those vessels, especially since all of those vessels, once built, would be going into reserve and would not be going into any sailing service. So I believe, again, his proposal or his vision is to have that mix of having a good mix of vessels that are built in U.S. shipyards, as well as vessels that could be purchased inexpensively overseas to recapitalize the fleet. One way or the other, the fleet does need to be recapitalized.
Well, I, for one, await his strategy, and I'd appreciate your analysis of his strategy and what it means for lost jobs in American shipyards. Apparently, it would not mean for lost sailors on the ship or mariners on the ship, but it would be a problem. Mr. Chairman, you've already dealt with the issue of the Maritime Academy ships, which is an ongoing issue that we have, so I won't go to that. The training vessels. We've heard about the small shipyard grant program. I will say that I was pleased to see how well it operated in the Bollinger Yard as well as in the one of the other yards. So with that, I think I've covered it. There may be some additional questions that I'd like to put for the record at some time. And I thank Chief, Admiral, Mr. Sabat. Thank you so much.
Thank the gentleman. I think we're moving forward. I think this is a great time for the Coast Guard. I think that the American people don't know how blessed they are to have leaders like you leading America's Coast Guard. And if we can get you in the right place with the right amount of money, then you can do even greater things than you're doing now. So thank you very much for your service and leadership and being here. Mr. Sabat, thanks for not leaving early. Appreciate it. Maybe, and hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll have more than acting administrators and so forth here. So thanks for being here. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.